wait for there you go, for it to go live. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Welcome to our Wednesday morning Bible study as we endeavor to continue at our look at the life of David in 2 Samuel. We're going to be, when we begin this morning, in chapter 16, having completed chapter 15 last week. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Father, our thanks rise to you that you've given us this day and all the beauty that surrounds us. We ask that you would guide us and direct us to use this day for your glory. May our lips be seasoned with your peace. May our actions present our praise to you, and may our thoughts dwell on the grace granted to us through your gospel. All this we ask in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, we, last time, same bat time, same bat channel, we saw an upheaval, a rebellion in the kingdom of David. David, in his capital of Jerusalem, is affronted and assaulted by Absalom, his child. And so he is now having to flee because Absalom has come against him, and we pick up kind of mid-journey of David fleeing out of Jerusalem. We saw as he was leaving that he sent some back. He didn't take everybody who was loyal to him, which is going to really come into play. Hushai being one of them. He sent Hushai back to Jerusalem to do what he needed to do. He sent back those who were going to minister on behalf of the ark. And so the ark and its priests remain in Jerusalem. The people of Jerusalem, for the most part, remain in Jerusalem. Some advisors remain in Jerusalem, but the rest, they're having to leave because surely Absalom and his forces will put them to the sword. We pick up in chapter 16. We're in the midst of some excitement. So let's, I feel like we're in one of those old radio dramas, where we're like, they leave you on a cliffhanger. Well, here we are. When David had gone a short distance beyond the summit, this is the summit of the Mount of Olives, on the outskirts of Jerusalem. There was Ziba, the steward of Mephibosheth, waiting to meet him. You may recall Mephibosheth is the grandson of Saul, who was the last really living relative of Saul in the immediate family. He's the grandson of Saul, the grandson of Saul, the son of Jonathan. And he was given this land as kind of recompense for what had occurred between Saul and David. He gave them this land. And his servant Ziba was very loyal to him. He served him well and apparently was in a good relationship with David. And so we see the steward of Mephibosheth, Ziba, waiting on David. He had with him a string of donkeys saddled and loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisins, 100 cakes of figs, and a skin of wine. The king asked Ziba, "Why have you brought these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and fruit are for the men to eat, and the wine is to refresh those who become exhausted in the desert." So Ziba is looking out for them. He sees that there is now a real great need for them to need provisions as they go. They didn't quite have a lot of time to prepare, and Ziba is providing that for them. King's household gets to ride on a donkey. There's some provisions for the men, and for those that are they're heading out into the desert, they're going to need these provisions for them. And the king asked, "Where is your master's grandson?" As Ziba was a servant of Saul and then became the steward for Mephibosheth, where is Mephibosheth? Ziba said to him, "He's staying in Jerusalem because he thinks today the house of Israel will give me back my grandfather's kingdom." Then the king said to Ziba, "All that belongs to Mephibosheth is now yours." "I humbly bow," Ziba said. "May I find favor in your eyes, my lord the king." Now, we have this one who was loyal to Saul, and then served Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson. And his actions communicate if nothing else, a rightful loyalty to the king, who is the king, under his rule. And goes so far as to provide these necessary things for the king. Despite the revolution, he acknowledges David as king. Now, Mephibosheth, on the other hand, despite being given back the lands that were personally Saul's, which were taken, he gave back the lands that belonged to Saul to Mephibosheth, as was rightfully Mephibosheth's. But it wasn't enough for Saul's grandson. I'm going to say Saul's grandson. It's much easier than Mephibosheth. He goes back to Jerusalem thinking he's going to get the kingdom back. The kingdom is in an upheaval, and he goes, here's my chance. Although I have these palatial lands given back to me, I want the kingdom that's rightfully mine. This kingdom that didn't go to Jonathan. I mean, if we're really thinking about things, it wasn't passed to Jonathan. Jonathan being the father of Mephibosheth. The familial line is broken. By all rights and purposes, it is not given to Mephibosheth, but he still is not content or suited to keep what has been given to him by the king who bore the lands, had rightful control of the lands, gave them to Mephibosheth. He goes to Jerusalem all the same, thinking he's going to get more. So the king gives the lands to the one who was loyal. He says what belonged to Mephibosheth, and Ziba, being the steward, is in a place to receive it because he is the caretaker of all that. As in a kingdom, if the king left and could not do the kingly things, the steward then was not the king, but had the abilities of the king to govern the kingdom. Ziba, the steward over Mephibosheth's lands, now becomes the owner of Mephibosheth's lands. And I feel that is very justified, because throughout it all, Ziba does what is his job as one who serves Saul and Mephibosheth, but still acts as one who is under the governance of the king. And it pays off. A lesson for us. Loyalty to the Lord is not looked at as being mere happenstance or nothing to scoff at. The Lord looks at loyalty, and it is rewarded. Loyalty and trust in these regards are rewarded.
Even though Mephibosheth, whatever.
Yeah. Saul's grandson.
Had all this, he wanted more.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's like us. We
Yes.
have so much. Do we
Yeah.
want more? It's just kind of a natural thing.
Yeah. We
to want more.
Let's say we arrive late to a birthday party, and there is the birthday boy is having cake and ice cream, but we've arrived late, and so they've set aside some cake for the grandmother who couldn't be there, and they have a little bit of the ice cream. They've set that aside, and they've nearly dispensed all the cake, and the ice cream is gone. And so we happily, having been our own fault receiving, being the recipient of the late cake, we, instead of receiving it, say, I'm so sorry I'm late, thank you, that there's any cake left at all. Or we could go, I want that cake. Well, that's for the grandmother. We said and the ice cream, no, I want it. I want more. We get what we get, and we don't throw a fit, or we throw a fit and say, I want that as well. It's mine, I want more. Rather than being glad. Ziba looks at his lot in life and says, this is my lot in life, and I will live according to it. And I will be loyal, and I will be good. And he doesn't seek after his own interest, but is rewarded. Let's be Ziba. Let's go through life and be Ziba rather than Mephibosheth.
Help him wherever you can.
Yes.
And where you see a need.
See a need, fill a need. Yes. What fine advice from just half of the chapter 16 that we're in. What other treasures can we dig up as we continue? As King David approached Bahurim, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. So we have another person in relation to Saul. probably more related on like on an uncle or that brother side of the family. His name was Shimei, son of Gera, and he cursed as he came out. He pelted David and all the king's officials with stones, though all the troops and all the special guard were on David's right and left. As he cursed, Shimei said, get out, you man of blood, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. The Lord has handed the kingdom over to your son Absalom. You have come to ruin because you are a man of blood. He calls David this man of bloodshed. And you would imagine that it would be that perhaps because he's lived his life as a warrior, perhaps, all of these reasons. But we have to think the fury is coming from his understanding of Saul. This is Saul's relative, and he's angry because what happened to Saul. But David had no hand in what happened to Saul. David was the one that in many cases could have shed the blood of Saul and didn't. In fact, as I recall, it was by Saul's own hand that his life ended. Yep. Jonathan, in battle, being loyal to his father, fought and died, but Saul died by his own hand. Yet this Shimei is throwing stones at David and calling him a man of blood, a man of bloodshed, and it is a misplaced anger. Now, indeed, the throne occupied by David was once occupied by Saul, but that was we'll say unanimous decision. It was a good decision for Israel. It was a good decision for all because Saul was not reigning in the way that he was supposed to. But all the same. Of course, we're going to see in verse 9, we're going to see the response. Abishai, the hothead Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head. He's a hothead, and we look back through the interactions of Abishai. He's ready for the dust up. He's ready to fight. And he's not wrong, essentially. It was in the Mosaic legislation that you don't speak, we don't speak against the Lord's leaders, the Lord's anointed. That's why David didn't do anything to Saul. And so Abishai's like, he broke a rule. We need to separate his head from his shoulders. We need to put him to death. And David's response is much more tempered. But the king said, what do you and I have in common, you sons of Zeruiah? If he's cursing because the Lord said to him, curse David, who can ask, why do you do this? David then said to Abishai and all his officials, my son, who is of my own flesh, is trying to take my life. How much more then this Benjamite? Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will see my distress and repay me with good for the cursing that I'm receiving now. He says, if this is the Lord's will, then let it be done. Let him curse. Let him throw stones. It's a much more tempered, much more reserved place. I mean, he could have said, you're right, you're breaking a rule. But he sees it as being, well, he's not wrong. I am a man of bloodshed. I've shed blood. It's being misplaced. Your anger's not coming from the right place, but this may indeed be what the Lord has told him to do. He's not taking it for granted. And he hopes maybe I'll be rewarded for this cursing. Maybe this is just, and from it I will receive good from it. That the Lord will turn this, me having to dodge stones and be verbally assaulted, maybe that will be something of good will come from it for me. So David and his men continued along the road while Shimei was going along the hillside opposite him, cursing as he went and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. The king and all the people with him arrived at their destination exhausted, and there he refreshed himself. So it's not just enough as they pass by where Shimei is, that they're getting rocks and all that. He's just following along with them, throwing rocks, screaming horrible things at him, and throwing dirt at him. and it's just this march, this weary march and assault of dirt and rocks and horrible things being screamed at him, as if it wasn't enough. And he kind of shares this, my own flesh and blood's trying to kill me, and I'm having to flee to avoid. He's trying to avoid an altercation where death would be the result. He doesn't want to lay waste to his son, and he doesn't want his son to kill him. Partly because he doesn't want his life to end, but he also doesn't want that on his son. David doesn't want his son to have the burden of killing his father, patricide on him. He still cares very greatly for Absalom. So we have this journey, trying to flee, trying to escape. He's got all these people with him, and they're just being pelted with rocks and dirt and hateful words. They arrive at their destination, and if it wasn't for Ziba, they wouldn't have these provisions. They wouldn't have what they need. They're able to refresh themselves. They're able to eat and drink and be able to rest. So now we move scenes. It's a scene change, as in a movie. We look elsewhere. Meanwhile, in verse 15, meanwhile, Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. You may remember this name back in, I'd have to say, I think it's like in 15. We see that Ahithophel is in an advisory role with David. Now, hindsight being 2020, we know, and I'll tell you, that Ahithophel isn't just some advisor. That this is someone who has worked his way into the advising of, has pressed. He was already in a counseling sort of role, but has pressed his way closer to David in his rule, and David knew him, and that's the relationship between David and Ahithophel is how he recognized Bathsheba. Ahithophel is the grandfather of Bathsheba. He was familiar with her. The place of the grandfather no doubt had come into play as to why the palace was in view of Bathsheba's house. It's most likely that it was at one point in time Ahithophel's house close to the palace that was then added onto because Bathsheba married Uriah, who was the son of Ahithophel. And in that time, they would build on to their familial homes, and maybe even on top. And so that's where Bathsheba and Uriah's house was. And so that's why it was so close. So Ahithophel, I have to imagine that David understands, reads between the lines here, but perhaps others didn't know and didn't counsel David. Okay, that business with Bathsheba, you have someone who has an axe to grind because of it. But we don't really know. But we now see, in 15, David knows Ahithophel remains in Jerusalem, and he says this. Let's see. When David arrived at the summit where people used to worship, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, his robe torn, dust on his head. David said to him, "If you go with me, you'll be a burden. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, 'I will be your servant, O king. I was your father's servant in the past, but now I will be your servant,' then you can help me by frustrating Ahithophel's advice." So we have the priests, we have Hushai the Archite, because Ahithophel is going to be a counselor to the new king Absalom. So meanwhile, when Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, Ahithophel was with him. Then Hushai the Archite, David's friend, went to Absalom and said to him, "Long live the king, long live the king." We have these three folks in play right now. We have Absalom, who's now boldly walked into the place of the king, the throne room, and he has David's former counselor, who, as we learned prior, was one of the conspirators. He's the inside man who's now got Absalom in, and we have Hushai, the Archite, who is known to be a friend of David. He's called David's friend, and so I wonder how that's going to play out for him. Absalom asks Hushai, "Is this the love you show your friend? Why didn't you go with your friend?" He goes, "Why are you here when your old buddy David is ski-daddling out of here like a scalded dog? Why are you here? Is that the love you're going to show a friend?" Hushai said to Absalom, "No, the one chosen by the Lord." I love how he puts this. "No, the one chosen by the Lord, by these people and all the men of Israel, his I will be, and I will remain with him. Furthermore, whom should I serve? Should I not serve the Son? Just as I served your father, so I will serve you." Very much a diplomatic response, a very pointed one. Oh, yes, the rightful king, the one that was anointed king by the Lord, the one that was accepted by everyone in this room, the one that was accepted by all the men in Israel. Oh, yeah, I'm his and he's mine, but as I'm loyal to him, why would I not be loyal to you? Why would I not serve you as his son? I'm loyal to David, and so I'll serve you because that's what I'm called to do. It completely turns on its head the argument that Absalom's trying to make. Absalom said to Ahithophel, he then turns to Ahithophel, "Give us your advice. What should we do?" Ahithophel is one who was looked to for advice. And so that is his place. Advise. He is an advisor to the king. He was looked at as being, he was regarded as being one who could give good advice. So Absalom uses him as such. And this is what he says. Ahithophel answered, "Lie with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench in your father's nostrils, and the hands of everyone with you will be strengthened." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he lay with his father's concubines in the sight of Israel. Now in those days the advice Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. That was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. So he tells Absalom, basically, this is how you're going to usurp the throne. You will give shame and humiliation to your father and to his throne by laying with his concubines, who were, as by all accounts and purposes, wives. They were secondary, but they were wives. And it will be an assertion that he is now king, as well as humiliating David. At one point in time, David regarded Ahithophel's advice as being like one who inquires of God. Like it was regarded as strongly as one would accept the word of the priests or the prophets. It was, and essentially in modern parlance, his word was golden. It was gospel. And David listened to him. And now Absalom is doing the same, as no doubt Absalom saw his father do. He saw David rely on Ahithophel, and he's thinking, well, this is what a king does. I'm going to do it. And Ahithophel, being a conspirator who is clearly trying to grind an axe because of what happened with David and Bathsheba, tells him to violate the king in such a way that the king violated Ahithophel's granddaughter. But what David did in private, Absalom now presents to Israel. The symmetry can't be ignored in that. It's pretty awful advice, but Absalom listens to it. Ahithophel said to Absalom, moving into chapter 17, "I would choose 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David. I would attack him while he is weary and weak. I would strike him with terror, and then all the people with him will flee. I would strike down only the king and bring all the people back with you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of all. All the people will be unharmed." This plan seemed good to Absalom and to all the elders of Israel. Of course it would. It's just David, one loss of life, Ahithophel sure gets what he wants. He wants to see David killed for what he's done to his family. And Absalom says, okay, that's really the only person I want to see out of the picture. I want to take over the kingdom. So this seems like good advice. Way to go, Ahithophel. You've given, again, great advice. But Absalom said, summon also Hushai the Archite so we can hear what he has to say. When Hushai came to him, Absalom said, Ahithophel has given this advice. Should we do what he says? If not, give us your opinion. Why did David send Hushai? The words exactly were as such. It is that it might basically, yes, to be a spy, to frustrate Ahithophel's advice. And it's almost prophetic that here Hushai has the opportunity to do so. Does he do it? The anticipation is palpable. Hushai replied to Absalom, the advice Ahithophel has given is not good this time. You know your father and his men. They are fighters and as fierce as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Besides, your father is an experienced fighter. He will not spend the night with his troops. Even now he is hidden in a cave or some other place. If he should attack your troops first, whoever hears about it will say, there has been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom. Then even the bravest soldier, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a fighter and that those with him are brave. Now, you can't argue with that advice. That makes very good sense to Absalom and to us as well. We know David, seen David in his days as a war chief, fleeing Saul, hiding in caves. These are all well known. And the last thing that Absalom wants is fear in his ranks. That's the only way he was able to do what he needed to do. So Hushai continues. So I advise you, let all Israel from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sand on the seashore, be gathered to you, with yourself leading them into battle. Then we will attack him wherever he may be found, and we will fall on him as dew settles on the ground. Neither he nor any of his men will be left alive. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we will drag it down to the valley until not even a piece of it can be found. So Hushai goes completely the other way with the advice of Ahithophel. Ahithophel says, sneak in, kill David, bring everyone else back. They won't follow. They'll follow you if they're not going to follow David. Hushai says, bring all of Israel and hunt him down and make a big spectacle of it and slay everyone and getting laying waste to David, which is completely the opposite of what Ahithophel says. Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than that of Ahithophel, for the Lord has determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom. Those present know of what David said, or at least either they know and they're parroting it, or what they say completely mirrors what David said, thereby kind of pointing out almost prophetic that David sends him in for a purpose, and the Lord lets that purpose come to pass. That it must have been David's willingness to consult the Lord in matters. This wasn't David thinking on his own strategy. This was the Lord who said, you need to send Hushai back. And the Lord made it happen. So something here is happening that's it's exactly following why Hushai went there. Hushai is living in the purpose that he was given perfectly. He has completely frustrated the advice of Ahithophel. Ahithophel is not a very good chap, not at all. And Hushai has completely made Ahithophel, of the great advice giver that he is, look foolish. Hushai told Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, Ahithophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel to do such and such, but I have advised him to do so and so. Now send a message immediately and tell David, do not spend the night at the fords in the desert. Cross over without fail, or the king and all the people with him will be swallowed up. So he sends a message ahead of time. He has given the advice that is going to be accepted and followed through. He knows the plan, and so he sends the message ahead to warn David. And he does so with two other folks who were sent back by David to the city, to Jerusalem, the priests who he knows to be loyal to David. Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying at En Rogal. The servant girl was to go and inform them, and they were to go and tell King David, for they could not risk being seen entering the city. They couldn't go in the city. They were staying outside the city, and so a message was going to be relayed to them from the priest, and they were then going to be the messengers. But a young man saw them and told Absalom, and the two of them left quickly and went to a house of a man in Bahurim. He had a well in his courtyard, and they climbed down into it. His wife took a covering and spread it out over the opening of the well and scattered grain over it. No one knew anything about it. So this is a hole that is an open hole for a well that's got water in it, and she lays a cloth over it and throws grain on the ground, and it just looks like it's the ground. And they're there in the well, maybe holding on to the sides of it, and they're hiding and all that. But it's a pretty ingenious way of hiding for them. And we can tell that the people who are living there are helping them, loyal, assisting in this kind of subterfuge. Oh dear, where did we leave off? 20. Thank you. When Absalom's men came to the woman at the house, they asked, "Where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan?" The woman answered them, "Oh, they crossed over the brook." The men searched, but no one found one, so they returned to Jerusalem. They were able to slip under the search for them. That was a close call, and the message would have never made it. After the men had gone, the two climbed out of the well and went to inform King David. They said to him, "Set out and cross the river at once. Ahithophel has advised such and such against you." So David and all the people with him set out and crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, no one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey and set out for his house in his hometown. He put his house in order and then hanged himself. So he died and was buried in his father's tomb. He went home and set his house, he got his affairs in order. He left a steward over what he owned, or gave what he needed to, and he ended his own life. That since it would seem his advice giving is his identity, and if he is not going to be listened to, if his advice is not received, then what is the point of his life? A terrible attitude to have.
He might have been killed anyway.
And that may have, if he can't get, you're only as good as what you can give, Absalom is thinking. If you can't give good advice, if this Archite, one who we suspect to be loyal of the king, but his advice makes the most sense, what good are you, Ahithophel? And so he ends his own life. David went to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Absalom had appointed Amasa over the army in place of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Jether, an Israelite who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, and sister of Zeruiah, the mother of Joab. The Israelites and Absalom camped in the land of Gilead. So there is a connection there with some of the family. When David came to Mahanaim, Shabai, son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, son of Amiel, from Lo-debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite, from Rogelim, brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. They also brought wheat and barley, flour and roasted grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, sheep and cheese from cow's milk for David and his people to eat. For they said, the people have become hungry and tired and thirsty in the desert. So they bring out a feast, all kinds of provisions. Ziba gave them some to get them where they needed to go, and those who are in the outlying territories, they bring out all the other. They all chip in and give to the party who is with the king, that they may be. They said, "Hey, you're hungry, you're thirsty, you're tired. Here, have some of this." Loyalty to the king, how very important that was. The Lord's anointed is choosing the right course of action to avoid death in his family and in Jerusalem. If there's a battle, no doubt soldiers and civilians alike will be in danger. So his leaving and his struggle to get someplace, in a way, it reminds me of how things were when David was under Saul. Once again, he's having to run to avoid bloodshed. David could have won favor with the people, slew Saul there in the palace, could have caught that spear out of the air and threw it right back where it came from, but he didn't. He chose to do what was peaceful. And though there's all kinds of horrible things going on around him, he's always seeking to do what is the peaceful thing to do. And again, we see him fleeing. And the loyalty of the people is encouraging. He is still King David. And he is again being pursued, not by Saul this time, but by his own son Absalom. I'd say we'll go ahead and continue with 18. I think we can manage through it.
We got 20 minutes.
Yeah, we're moving along. David mustered the men who were with him and appointed over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. So he's building the regiments that are with him. David sent the troops out, a third under the command of Joab, who was commander of Israel's army, but was loyal to David. As we saw, Absalom had to put together some folks to be over them. A third under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. The king told the troops, "I myself will surely march out with you," as a king was supposed to do. That's why he got into the trouble with Bathsheba. He was supposed to be there amidst the battle with his forces. But the men said, "You must not go out. If we are forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support from the city." The king answered, "I will do whatever seems best to you. I have put you in this place of leadership. I'll do what seems best to you." So the king stood beside the gate while all the men marched out in units of hundreds and thousands. The king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, "Be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake." And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of the commanders. So he's still seeking compassion. Another person is seeking his death, and his response is of compassion and don't hurt them. Not out of vengeance or anger or malice, it's kindness. The army marched into the field to fight Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. And there the army of Israel was defeated by David's men, and the casualties that day were great, 20,000 men. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest claimed more lives that day than the sword. Now, what do you think that means? That the forest took more lives than the sword? Because I'll tell you, and again, this kind of shows my nerdiness. In J.R.R. Tolkien's book, The Two Towers, there is a great assault against a stronghold known as Helm's Deep. And the orcs are driven back into Fangorn Forest. And the forest, it being in a fantasy book, are alive, of course. And the trees fight the evil orcs. And they defeat this great number that would have certainly overrun Helm's Deep. And so when I hear something like that, I hear the forest claimed more lives than the sword. I go, well, what kind of trees are out here fighting a battle? What's going on here? What are your thoughts?
I know, but it just says that his hair got tangled up in the branches of the oak tree, and 9, if you're down to 9.
Well,
and that killed him.
yeah,
Slow death.
we've got these soldiers who are out there in the forest, And I have to think that in this forest of Ephraim there is animals, wild animals that are whether it be predatory animals or snakes or things like that. These folks are probably not used to being in the wilderness. David and some of his men are used to hiding in caves and whatnot, and so. But I think these predatory animals have to be a factor in this. I have to imagine that when they're getting split up, they don't have support, and so they're left to their own devices, and they're lost in the forest, and that could have been it. How all the more tragic is if you're in a battle and you don't die in battle, you get lost or you get wounded or something happens, you're attacked by a leopard or something. How it's just senseless, and more lives were claimed by wilderness. They got lost, didn't have any water, couldn't find their way back, that sort of thing.
Mine says that their hair did get caught up in the wood, and they were left hanging.
Well, see, we have here now. Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as a mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's head got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair while the mule was riding and kept going. Now, I wonder if those who were with Absalom kept long hair, and this was not the only victim of not using the strong enough conditioner, and now they're stuck in a tree. And so that I have, reasonably speaking, that could very well have been, the forest and all the many dangers. This, they're riding through, and their hair is getting caught in the branches.
Why do they not have helmets on?
You would think you go into battle, you're going to have a helmet on. I would understand, if Absalom, he's wanting to be fearsome and have his mane hanging and whatnot. I love verse 10. I think it's when one of the men saw this, he told Joab, "I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree." And Joab said to the man who told him this, "What? You saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? Then I would have to give you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt." So I would have had to have rewarded you for striking down Absalom. So there must have been a spoken reward out to the
his head.
yeah. There was a bounty on him, and the bounty was this silver and a belt, which doesn't at all sound like David. This sounds like one of the other folks. I'm willing to put down the person who takes down this Absalom. Once Absalom's taken care of, we can go home. So I don't think that was David who put the bounty in. It must have been someone else.
Must have been Joab.
Yeah, Joab. It seems like something Abishai would do, because we see so many times. We see Abishai come through. Abishai's always wanting to, I'm going to fight him. I'm going to do this. Oh, he's very hot-headed. And so Joab says, look, and it may have been Joab, because he says, I would have had to have given you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt. Well, how remarkable would that be? They're out there fighting Absalom's forces, and he's like, Commander, I just saw Absalom hanging from his hair in a tree. What? Well, you should have taken that chance. I would have had to have given you a belt and some money. But the man replied, even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I would not lift my hand against the king's son. In our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I had put my life in jeopardy, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me. So his response is twofold. One, he's not going to lift his hand against the king's son, having, that's the king's son. Secondly, he heard that the king wanted him to be dealt with gently. And so if he had slain Absalom, I know you, Joab, wouldn't be giving me any money or wouldn't be giving me any belt, because you'd be staying away from me. I would be a wanted man. And so he's very self-aware about how this would go down. Joab said, I'm not going to wait like this for you. So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. So we have an overkill here. A javelin alone to a defenseless opponent would have been sufficient. But they go about ensuring, I mean, we have 10 armor bearers who are striking out at someone who is defenseless. And he is surely killed. Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom, threw him in a big pit in the forest, and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. That was their whole point. They were pursuing, David, and their leader, who is Absalom, dies, and they're like, we're not going to do this anymore. And so they go back to their homes. They were called on to serve the one who was occupying the throne. That person is gone. Our service is ended. So they flee to their homes. During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the king's valley as a monument to himself, for he thought, I have no son to carry on the memory of my name. He named the pillar after himself, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. Well, isn't that nice? I've always found it rather arrogant to when we see people building things for themselves. I've built this pillar. It is my pillar. Everyone look at this and remember me. And it seems to this day it's called Absalom's monument, but not to the great living Absalom, but to the one who was killed. He said little did he know he wasn't setting up something to give honor to him, but to act as a monument in memory of him. He is now defeated and killed. Now Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, let me run and take the news to the king that the Lord has delivered him from the hands of his enemies. Let's see. You are not the one to take the news today, Joab told him. You may take the news another time, but you must not do so today, because the king's son is dead. Ahimaaz only really perhaps understands the battle is now over. There is no more pursuing of the army that is with David, and so we'll let him know, hey, the battle's over. And the specifics, which are known to Joab because Joab carried them out, Ahimaaz, you're not the one that needs to be delivering this news. The king's son has been dead. Then Joab said to a Cushite, go and tell the king what you have seen. And the Cushite bowed down before Joab and ran off. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, again said to Joab, come what may, please let me run behind the Cushite. But Joab replied, my son, why do you want to go? You don't have any news that will bring you a reward. He said, come what may, I want to run. So Joab said, run. And then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite. Remarkable. This was a man of great athletic ability, or at least knew a shortcut, it would seem. While David was sitting between the inner and outer gates, the watchman went up to the roof of the gate by the wall. As he looked out, he saw a man running alone. The watchman called out to the king and reported it. The king said, if he is running alone, he must have good news. And the man came closer and closer. Then the watchman saw another man running, and he called down to the gatekeeper, look, another man is running alone. The king said, he must be bringing good news too. The watchman said, it seems to me that the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. He's a good man. He comes with good news. Now, to know how someone runs, you got to know that person. I mean, that's kind of remarkable. I would hate to think that I have a distinctive run, Then Ahimaaz called out to the king, all is well. He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up the men who lifted their hands against the Lord my king. The king asked, is the young man Absalom safe? Ahimaaz answered, I saw great confusion just as Joab was about to send the king's servant and me, your servant, but I don't know what it was. The king said, stand aside and wait here. So he stepped aside and stood there. Then the Cushite arrived and said, my lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has delivered you today from all who rose up against you. The king asked the Cushite, is the young man Absalom safe? The Cushite replied, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man. The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. As he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. David
That's
grieves.
quoted over and over, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
Absalom, my son.
Yeah. He grieved for Absalom. Absalom, the one who usurped his throne, who raised his sword against him and led this rebellion. Upon his death, David grieved him, for it was still his son. David's character he's referred to as one who is after God's own heart. And we see in this, a heart like the Lord's. How many times in our sin we rise up in rebellion unto the Lord, and God's heart is not one of wrath, but grieved that we should take such a course, there is a compassion and a grace in the Lord that seeks our forgiveness, seeks to provide. It was God who provided our salvation. There was nothing won by us. It's freely granted to us by grace. Our sins are forgiven by grace through faith alone, provided to us by God. How remarkable that is.
Isn't it interesting that they didn't come out and say directly,
Yeah.
you know, and I kept wondering how he concluded that his son was dead when they didn't say that.
There must have been such an inference that they didn't come right out and say it,
Yeah.
and that final sort of may anyone who rises against the king be like Absalom, and that it's understood that if someone should rise against the king, they are to be put to death, which is what Abishai was all ready to do when somebody was throwing rocks and cursing at the king. Cut off their head, put them to death. May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man. It would seem that there is in Ahimaaz, he wants to break the news better. He doesn't trust the Cushite to give the news in a way that is gentle to the king. Perhaps. Or maybe he just wants to be the one to give the news. I don't know. But it is the Cushite understands well enough. You don't just walk in there and say, hey, king, your son's dead. He goes about it the very same way that Ahimaaz does as well, only he comes right out and says it in such a way enough that David understands that his son has been killed. He doesn't know who just yet, but he knows that his son is dead, and so he grieves. There's no celebration that he can return to Jerusalem. There's no joy. It is grief that this has occurred.
And then these fellows that came to tell him might have realized that being the king's son and heir to the throne,
Mm-hmm.
and they had been told not to harm him.
Yeah.
And once he had been killed, King David, if they didn't know how he would react, were maybe afraid to come right out and say,
Yeah.
we have killed your son. Because then they would be punished also.
Kill the messenger is a phrase often used. They don't know how his reaction's going to be. The Cushite bore witness to it. Ahimaaz has some kind of knowledge of it, and David's reaction in that moment was not one of fury, but of grief and of mourning. So he mourns the death of his son, after giving explicit instructions to the commanders not to do that. And Joab goes about it and seeks to put a. He seems to think in his own mind he knows better than the king. We'll see how that plays out next time. Let's end our time together with a word of prayer. Father, your grace is great. We thank you for presenting it into our life in such a way that we could see your word spoken over us, see how you've encountered and worked within the lives of your people. Help us to model them as such. May we be people who seek you diligently. May we be people who look to you as opposed to seeking to go our own way. May we trust in you and in your power. And this we ask in your name. Amen.
Just a little